What's up everybody, welcome back. In today's video I want to take a look at some camera driven recoil. So we're going to add some basic rotation to the camera, and because the camera rotation drives our aim and aim offset, everything will work. So I'm going to do this in a third person project, but this will work in a first person project as well, as long as I mentioned it's the camera that drives your aim offset and your aim rotation. So this will replicate, so this works in multiplayer for both the host and the client. And that's pretty much what we're gonna do today. If you like the series, please consider leaving a like. And if you want to get the project files, you can become a member of the YouTube channel or become a Patreon, and then you will get access to the premium channels in the Discord and also a download for the project. So let's just start today's video and add some recoil to the weapons. So first of all, we need a place to store the different recoil values for the different weapons that we have. So in this project, I'm using a structure and a data table. So we want to go to the weapons folder and open our weapon info structure. So this happened a few times in the past episodes. We're going to edit a structure, so make sure the entire project is saved. And we're going to open it up. So I'm going to add two variables in here. The first one is the recoil pitch minimum and maximum. So recoil pitch minimum and maximum. So this is how much the recoil will move up. And we're gonna move the turn this into a vector 2D. So that way I can assign two floats to this variable. And we're gonna do the same thing for the recoil yaw. So let's add the recoil yaw minimum and maximum. And again, that's going to be a vector 2D. So this is the movement from left to right. And then we also have the roll, but I'm not going to add that. So that's the rotation of the screen clockwise and counterclockwise. So I'm just going to add a little bit of random rotation, but that looks a bit weird if you do it too much. So I'm not going to add it in here. It's not that important. So with the new variables in here, we want to make sure we only save our structure and then close the entire project down and don't save any of the other blueprints. So I'm going to relaunch the project and get back to you guys. Okay, I'm back. First of all, we want to open up our weapon info table and make sure we actually assign some variables. So let's just set up some stuff. I'm going to copy it from my example project. So for the pistol, I've got it set up at 0.8 for the minimum pitch and then 1.2 for the maximum. And for the yaw, that's 0.2 and 0.3. So these are degrees, so you're going to end up with pretty small values in here. For the Maverick, that's the rifle, I got it set up at 0.35 and then maximum 0.6. And the yaw is going to be 0.1 and 0.2. So let's make sure we have all the weapons set up, why not? So the shotgun, that's going to be 0.4 minimum and 0.7 maximum, and the yaw 0.15 and then 0.3. Then for the SMG, I've got it set up at 0.3 maximum and the minimum and the maximum 0.45. And for the yaw 0.1 and 0.2 again. Then we have the LMG left, so the machine gun, that's going to be 0.4 minimum and 0.6 maximum, and then 0.1 and 0.2 again for the yaw. And the last one is the auto pistol, so that should be something like 0.2, 0.4, and then 0.05 and 0.15. So obviously you can play around with this stuff, just make sure you have something set up in here, otherwise it won't work. So now that we have the default values set up, we're going to set up the actual recoil. So we're going to go to our base character. And inside here, we're going to start with a new custom event. So we want to get some empty room. And we also need a few variables, so let's add those first to make our lives a little bit easier. So I'm going to add a new variable, and the first one is going to be the recoil rotation current. So recoil rotation current, and that's going to be a rotator. And then we want to duplicate it, and that's going to be the recoil rotation target. And then we want the two minimum and maximum variables in here for the recoil. So let's add another one, and that's going to be the weapon recoil. And then we have the pitch minimum maximum. So this is going to be a vector 2D. And we want the same one for the yaw. So let's duplicate this, and that's going to be the yaw minimum maximum. And that's also a vector 2D, so that's fine. The first thing we want to do is make sure that we have these variables populated. So we can go to our server set replicated weapon variables function over here. And in here we can simply add them from the data table. So the server is the one handling the firing of the weapon. So the server is the only one that needs to know these variables. So we don't need to worry about replicating them. So we're simply going to plug them in here. Even though we set them in the replicated weapon variables function, they are not going to be replicated, and I'm setting them in here, so only the server knows them. So let's plug them in here, and then make sure everything is hooked up. So these are set from the data table and ready to use. So now we can go to the empty spot on the event graph and make sure that we start our event. So let's add a new custom event. And this is going to be server apply recoil. So as I mentioned, we're going to use the camera to drive our recoil. So let's grab the camera from our components over here. And from the camera, we want to get the relative rotation. And then we want to add the rotation from our recoil to that. So we can drag off the rotator and then combine rotators. And we want to combine it with our recoil. So we're going to grab the B pin and we're going to split it. So the first one is the roll. So as I mentioned, that's the rotation clockwise and counterclockwise of the screen. So I'm just going to add a little bit of random rotation, but not too much because that looks a little bit weird. So I'm going to add a select node first. And then I want to add either maximum 0.2 or minus 0.2. So it can go either left or right. And then for the bool over here, that determines which one of those is chosen. I'm simply going to drag off here and do a random bool. So it will randomly pick either 0.2 or minus 0.2. So that's the roll. Then for the pitch, we have that stored in our variables. So we want to grab our weapon recoil pitch minimum maximum. And then we can split the struct pin. So we have both of the values in here. X is the minimum and Y is the maximum. So then we can drag off here and do a random float in range. And plug it in. And this is simply going to be the pitch variable. So we can hook it up in here. So for the pitch, that's upwards, and we probably only want the recoil to go up and not down. So in here, I'm simply going to grab the minimum and maximum and get a random variable in between there. Now for the yaw, we can go either left or right. So we want to randomize if we go left or right. So we want to do it a little bit differently. We're going to grab the yaw variable in here and split it as well. And again, we're going to grab a random float in range, or exactly two of them, and hook up both of them. So X is the minimum, Y is the maximum. And then for the lower one, we're going to multiply this with -1. So do multiply and simply do -1 to make it negative. And then we can grab our select float node again and plug it in here. So the first one goes directly in here, and then the -1 multiplier goes in the B pin. And then again, we're going to grab a random bool to randomly switch between left or right recoil. And then plug this one into the yaw. So this will determine our recoil rotation. And we want to store this inside of our recoil rotation target. So let's drag that in here with a setter and hook it up. So we have the target rotation, and then we can start interpolating to that. So we're going to grab a setter for the current rotation as well, hook it up here, and drag off here, and then do R interp to. So I'm going to use the normal one. So this will smooth in and out a little bit. You can do constant as well to have linear movement. So let's grab this one. For the current rotation, we want to grab our recoil rotation current and plug it in here. So the target is obviously the rotation target. For the delta time, we can simply drag off here and get the world delta seconds. So hook that one up. And for the interp speed, again, I'm going to use a select float node. So let's grab a select float, hook it up here. And then I'm going to grab my recoil rotation target and current. And I'm going to split both of them. No, not promote variable. That's my bad. So we can get rid of this one. And we want to split it. There we go. So if the target pitch is greater than the current pitch, that means the recoil goes up. And I want to make the upward recoil a little bit slower than the downward recoil. So I'm going to set the A pin to interp speed 14 and then the B pin to interp speed 18. So if the recoil goes down, it grabs the B pin. If it goes up, it grabs the A pin. So that's how that works. And now we have a target rotation for the current recoil stored in here. And all we need to do now is apply it to the camera. So this runs server only, and we want to make sure that if we're doing this for a client, we also set the rotation for the client locally. So we're going to use custom events. Let's create a new custom event, and the first one is apply recoil. So in here, we want to drag the camera component and then simply set the relative rotation. So this one. So we're going to pass on the rotation to the event. Oh, really? There we go. And we actually want to call this one always. So first of all, let's drag off here and apply recoil. And hook in our recoil rotation current. So not target, but current. And then we want to grab a second custom event. And let's call this owner apply recoil. So for this one, we want to set it to be replicated, run on the owning client. And we want to do the exact same thing in here. So we can copy and paste the camera set relative rotation and simply pass it on to the event. So now in here, after the apply recoil call, we're going to add a branch in here and check if we are locally controlled. So this only runs on the server. So for every character, there's an instance on the server, but the only one that's actually being controlled by the actual player, that's the server, is the locally controlled one. So if we are not locally controlled, that means we are a client. So in that case, we want to call our owner apply recoil. And again, simply hook up our recoil rotation current. So because we're passing this on to the events, we don't need to replicate the actual variable. So if this is true, we don't want to do anything extra. And after that, we want to check if we want to stop applying recoil or continue. So we're going to grab a branch, hook up the true pin and the owner apply recoil one. And now we want to simply compare our current rotation to our target rotation. So let's grab both getters in here and do an equal. And because this is a rotator, we can set some tolerance in here. So I'm going to set it to 0.05, so it doesn't need to match exactly. And then we also want to know if our current recoil is actually back to the default position. So we're going to add an end node in here, grab our recoil current, and again we're going to compare that, so is equal to, and in this case I'm going to set the tolerance again to 0.05, and then for the default rotation that should be -8 on the y-axis. Excuse me, I needed to cough. So that actually comes from our camera in here. So if you select it, my default rotation in here is -8. So you simply want to select your camera and then look at the rotation and enter that in here. And you also, by the way, want to enter that default rotation as a default default value, thank you, for the recoil rotation current. So for the current rotation, I'm going to set the default value Y to -8 to match my normal camera. And we also want to set that up in this node. So hook that up to the branch over here. If this is true, we can do nothing and simply stop applying recoil. If this is false, we're going to add a delay in here. And the duration is going to be the world delta seconds. So we're technically basically gonna do this on tick kind of, and then we're gonna loop back to the beginning over here where we actually set our recoil rotation current, so the one that has the interp node hooked up to it, so we can start applying the next interp step in here. Okay, so this is the biggest part of our recoil event. Now we want one new extra custom event. So I'm going to create that in here, and that's pretty small. So let's create another custom event and call this server recoil trigger. In here, we're going to call this event, so server apply recoil. And then I'm going to add a retriggerable delay. And I'm going to set this delay to 0.15 seconds. So again, you can mess around with this a little bit. But what this does, it will only apply recoil for a maximum of 0.15 seconds. And then it will stop applying the upward recoil and start applying the downward recoil again. So what this basically is for weapons with a long fire time, like a sniper rifle or a shotgun, that you can maybe only fire once or twice a second. If you don't put this in, the recoil will be really slow going up and down, so this will make it look a lot better. So make sure you add this. You can play around with this value a little bit, obviously. And after this, we want to set our recoil rotation target to our default value, so that's the -8 again. That comes from the camera rotation that's set to the actual component in here. So make sure this matches up over here. So that's all we really need for the recoil, and now we need to hook this up to our fire event. So we want to go to our server weapon fired, I think it's called. Let's have a look. No, not really. So we want the server fire weapon, this event. And we can just add it inside of the loop in here. For example, after we take a bullet for the clip or after we did the bullet race, that doesn't really matter too much. So in here, I'm simply going to call server recoil trigger. And that will trigger the recoil every time we fire the weapon. So there's some little side note that I want to make that I may not have explained well enough during the series. So in here we are running a custom event on server only. So everything that we call in here, every function or event that's being called in this event, will automatically also be server only, unless it's a replicated event. Obviously, then it can replicate to other instances. But if you don't set any replication for events or functions that you are calling, it will always only execute on the same instance. So because this runs server only, our recoil trigger also runs server only. So the apply recoil also run server only, so the server determines the actual rotation values and simply passes them on to the client, so it will always match between server and client. So the only thing we're doing on the owning client is this part. Okay, so I think we should have everything set up and we can test this. So I'm gonna set up a small testing game and I'll be back in a sec. Okay, so the game is running. Let's see if this is actually working. So client first. And that is working, so that's good. And now let's have a look at the host. And that also seems to be working. So the first test is good. Now I'm gonna grab an automatic rifle and make sure that the actual aim offset of the player goes up as well. So let's grab a weapon and just empty a clip in here, and then if I look from the side, the actual weapon should raise up as well. So it started out a bit weird because it was loading the animation, so we're gonna ignore that part. And as you can see on the host screen, the client aim offset is actually raising up when I'm firing. So I can grab an Evo, for example, that has a bit higher fire rate and check the other way around as well. So if I empty my clip and look from the client side, you can see the weapon actually raise in the air as well. So we have our recoil set up and it seems to be working, so that wasn't too bad and it's not too long of an episode luckily. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider leaving a like, and again, if you want to get the project files, you can become a member of the channel or become a Patreon, and then you'll get access to the files in the Discord. So thanks for watching everybody, and talk to you later. Bye bye.